Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 4 of Craft and Crime. This month, I am going to be telling you about Eileen Wuornos, which I feel like most people have at least heard the name and maybe have seen something on TV about her. And she's one of the only female serial killers, so she's kind of famous. In a bad way. She's kind of infamous. Today, we're going to be making a little Valentine's craft. I like to hang garland, not really garland, but pretty things on my desk at school. So, I'm going to be making, I saw it on TikTok. I'm going to be making a garland. I'm going to be using old pages of a book, which don't ask me why I have an old textbook from college, but I do. I made a stencil to use for the rest of them. And then I'm going to cut hearts out of cardstock. And this isn't really cardstock, it's scrapbook paper. But I'm going to cut hearts out of that and attach it onto the banners. I also made a little heart stencil. And I'm going to, in the end, attach them all on to a string so that I can put it on my desk. Anyways, so that is my craft for today. And I have my pages. I'm going to do 8. I think 8 should be okay. So, and I'm wondering if maybe I can cut more than one piece of paper at a time, because that'd be really swell. I like saving time. Work smarter, not harder. And I have some notes spread out around here because Eileen was something else. So if you see me looking around, I'm looking at my notes. And this is my dead cat that he sometimes falls over. Not a real dead cat. Don't report me to the ASPCA or anything. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started on tracing my stencils so that I can go ahead and cut. So let me introduce you to Eileen. Eileen was born on February 29th of 1956 as Eileen Carol Pittman in Michigan. She had, as we're going to see, a tumultuous beginning of life and a tumultuous all of her life. Her life was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. She was born to Diane Wuornos, who at the time that she married Leo Pittman was 14 and he was 16. So that's disturbing. Diane and Leo had a son first, so Eileen's brother, whose name was Keith. He was born on March 14th of 1955. So not much older, about a year. And the two were only married for a little less than 2 years before they got divorced, and they got divorced before Eileen was even born. So she did not have the opportunity to get to know her dad because he not only was divorced from her mom, but he also was in jail when she was born. He was in jail, unfortunately, for sex crimes against children. So probably better for Eileen to have not known her dad, but unfortunately that's not going to be the only person in her life that is less than honorable person. Her father, ended up killing himself while he was in jail, so she never did get to know him. And when Eileen was not yet 4, Diane, the mom, left both kids, didn't want to be a mom anymore, which, I mean, let's be fair. She got married when she was 14, divorced when she was 16. and she already had 2 kids. So, like, not the best decision, but also, like, kind of understandable. But not okay that she left the kids. She left them, and they were adopted by her parents, so their grandparents. And as Eileen grew up, she didn't realize until she was about 11 years old that her grandparents weren't her biological parents. And if you know anything, I know we haven't talked about Ted yet, but I know there's also a lot of documentaries and stuff about him, so people are familiar with his life. If you've watched any of the Ted Bundy documentaries, you'll know that that was a really big life changer for him too, finding out that he had been adopted by his that his grandparents weren't his actual parents. So that's like kind of one of those defining moments for Eileen, finding out that her grandparents were not in fact her actual parents. By the time she was 11, so let's see, what grade are you in when you're 11? Like 6th, maybe? By the time she was 11, so just out of elementary school, she had already begun to exchange sexual favors for cigarettes, drugs, even food. She was also engaging in sexual activities with her own brother. I don't know whether she just never was informed that that was not a good thing to do, or if she didn't care, but she ended up never really holding a grudge against her brother, up until, don't want to spoil anything, but up until the end of her life, she still always said that she really admired her brother, despite there having been some abuse there. She was also sexually assaulted by her grandfather. At the age of 14, she was raped by a friend of her grandfather, or at least an acquaintance of her grandfather, and she was impregnated, and she carried that child until she gave birth. So she was, again, 14 like her mom, gave birth to a son who she named Keith, after her brother. And he was put up for adoption immediately. So she never really got to, like, know her kid. But honestly, probably for the better. After she gave Keith up for adoption, her grandma died. And her grandma was really, like, the only person in her life that really genuinely cared about Eileen, like, actually put her first and cared about her well-being. So that was a huge letdown when she lost her grandma. She continued living with her grandpa for a while, until she dropped out of school, and grandpa did not approve of that, so he kicked her out of the house, and told her that she basically needed to figure out how she was going to live on her own. And she didn't have a plan because she was 15 years old, and, like, I'm almost 30 and my plan is, yeah. So she moved to the woods, which were near her grandpa's house, and she began working as a sex worker, which we already know is not a super safe, especially during this time, not a super safe endeavor. But that's what she chose to do. So on May 27th of 1974, Eileen was arrested for the first time in Colorado for driving under the influence of alcohol, disorderly conduct, and firing a gun from a moving vehicle, which is frowned upon. So that was her first entry on her record. And then in 1976, she hitchhiked to Florida, which is where most of our story is going to take place, where she met and quickly married Louis Gratz Fell. So, in 1976, she was 20. Louis was 69. He was a retired a retired guy. He was a yacht club president, so he had decent amounts of money, which could possibly be what Eileen saw in him in the first place. Anyways, they got married, but they were only married for a short period of time before there was some domestic disturbances. He took out a restraining order against Eileen because not funny, just a little, like, I don't know, kind of funny. She beat him up with his own cane, so, like, not funny, but yeah. After divorcing him, she moved back to Michigan, where she was again arrested, this time for throwing a cue ball at a bartender's head, which is frowned upon. And then in July of 1976, her brother Keith died of esophageal cancer, and that was one of the people that she was close to, so that's going to be upsetting for her. But he left her a $10,000 life insurance policy. Unfortunately, she used a part of that to pay off a DUI, and the other part she purchased a car. And unfortunately, she also wrecked that car pretty quickly after she bought it. In May of 1981, she was arrested again in Florida for armed robbery of a convenience store. She stole $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes, so probably not actually worth being arrested, but that's what happens. And she served time for that from May 4th of 1982 until June 30th of 1982. And then was again arrested on May 1st of 1984 for forging checks. So she's been in and out of prison, mostly non-violent, other than that time she hit him with the cane. That was bad. But other than that, like, mostly non-violent, mostly like trying to steal money to stay alive type deal. Not that makes it okay, but up until now she hadn't really shown a lot of violence. On November 30th of 1985, she was arrested again for car thief, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice. So 3 hits there. And then again on June 2nd of 1986 for pulling a gun on a male companion and demanding that he give her $200. So she's starting to get a little more aggressive. Pulling a gun on somebody, that's pretty bad. And around this time is when Eileen met, and I'm not entirely sure how to say it, I've heard it both ways. It's either Tyria Moore or Tyra Moore. But I'm going to call her Ty because that's what Eileen called her a lot of the time. So she met Ty, who was a hotel maid. They met at a gay bar, and they fell in love. They moved in together, and until the very end of Eileen's life, she would say that she truly loved Ty, even after some things that we'll get to in a bit. Now we're getting to the first murder, which is the one that she is initially going to get charged for. On November 30th of 1989, Richard Charles Mallory, who was an electronics store owner and convicted rapist, which is going to play into her defense in a little bit, was murdered. 2 days later, they found his car, and a couple of weeks later, his body was found several miles away in a wooded area. He'd been shot several times. But when Eileen was caught, she insisted that it was self-defense. And had this been her only murder, I think, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a whatever, but I think she would have been okay. Because as a sex worker, it's likely that you're going to be in a compromising position like that. And he had already been convicted of rape before. So honestly, I think she would have had a really solid case had this been the only person that she killed. I see no reason why they wouldn't have believed that it was self-defense. And to this day, there's a lot of doubt that it was just a cold-blooded murder. People genuinely think that it wasn't self-defense. But That's going to be the one that she is first tried for. The second murder is of David Andrew Spears, a construction worker, and his body was also found along Florida State Road 19, and he had also been shot. His body is found naked, and Eileen and David had spent the evening drinking together. Whether or not it was she was working at the time, I'm not sure, but it sounded like, they spent the evening together before she killed him. At this point, she decided if she had to kill, what did she have to lose, right? She'd already killed one person, well, now two, and if she felt like she was being threatened in any way, she decided that she didn't have a problem with killing those people. So our third murder was on May 31st of 1990, and his name was Charles Edmund Karskadon. He was a part-time rodeo worker. That sounds like one of those jobs, like when you're watching House Hunters and they're like, oh, we're looking for a house in downtown Los Angeles. I'm a part-time rodeo worker and my wife's a kitten herder. It sounds like not a real thing, but apparently it's a real thing. His body was found on June 6th of 1990 with 8 bullet wounds, and his body had been wrapped in an electric blanket, and it was badly decomposed. He'd been there for a week out in the elements, so, that's not usually going to be great for your body. Our fourth murder was Peter Abraham Sims, and this one really, it's just really sad, because Peter was it sounds like from what I've heard, a genuinely decent guy. He was a retired merchant seaman. He was, and not that this makes you a good person, but he was really a very devout Christian, and tended to just really try to take care of people, which didn't work out too well with Eileen. His body was found on January 4th of 1990, even though witnesses saw 2 women and gave descriptions of these 2 women to police, they saw that these 2 women discarding of his car, and the police found Eileen's fingerprints on the door handle. This is going to be the only victim that she is not charged for killing, because they never find his body. So, until now, his body has not been found, and she was never convicted of having killed him, even though there was a police sketch of her and Ty as the women who were discarding of the car. And on the inside of the car, they found a handprint. Still was not charged for this one. That's the only one of her murders that she's not going to get convicted for. Her fifth murder was Troy Eugene Burris. And he was a sausage salesman. Another kind of odd job. He was reported missing on July 31st of 1990, and his body was found on August 4th of 1990. So again, about a week, a little less. And he had been shot twice. Our sixth murder, she's just moving right along, was Charles Richard Humphries. He was a retired U.S. Air Force major, a former state child abuse investigator, and a former chief of police. So probably well known in his community. And he was killed on September 11th of 1990, and his body was found the next day. So she is definitely moving a little bit faster than she had been previously, and killing more rapidly. Charles had been shot 6 times. And at this point, they had found out that it was the same caliber of gun being used in the crimes. Some sources said it was a 22. Some sources said it was a 20. I don't think I've ever heard of a 20 caliber gun, but also I'm not a gun person, so I could just be like a noob. But I'm not sure which one it was. Either way, they had put together that the same caliber was being used. They were pretty sure it was the same person committing these crimes. The 7th and final murder was of Walter Gino Antonio. He was a trucker, a security guard, and a police reservist, and he was found naked, having been murdered on November 19th of 1990, and he had been shot 4 times, again with the same gun, same type of gun. They don't know it's the same gun. So after witnesses saw 2 women who ended up being Eileen and Ty driving Peter Sims's car to get rid of it, those women provided police descriptions. So they finally had a facial pattern to go off of. Even though I looked at the pictures and I can't really, they don't look super like Eileen and Ty, but like, what do I know? Police also found some of Richard Mallory's items that had been sold at a pawn shop. And so at the pawn shop, and I hope this is still the way they do things, but I've never been to a pawn shop. At the pawn shop, you had to sign your paperwork and then also give your fingerprint. So the person who had signed the name Cammie Marsh. And when they found Cammie Marsh, her fingerprint didn't match up. Turns out Cammie Marsh was an old friend of Eileen's. She had used her name, but I mean, you can't use her fingerprint. So she'd put her fingerprint down. So the police were able to match her fingerprint to the fingerprint on the pawn shop receipt. And they were able to track them to Eileen. And she was then arrested on January 9th of 1991. And this is kind of where, not that the rest has been like peaches and cream, but I start to feel really sad for her. The police talked to Ty, and they convinced Ty to elicit a confession from Eileen over the phone. So Ty's on the phone, and the police just really want her to get a confession out of Eileen. They're sure that this is the woman they're looking for, and they know that if she's going to trust anybody with this, it's going to be Ty. Ty needed to do this because otherwise she was going to be also in trouble because she was there when they were discarding of the car. So she exchanged this phone call for immunity from prosecution. And she just really badgered Eileen on the phone. She said, maybe you don't love me as much as I thought you did. You don't trust me. Should I stay alive? And she doesn't finish the sentence, but she says, should I stay alive or should I just? And, Eileen, who loves Ty, says, I'm not going to let you go to jail. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about anything. And one of the last things Ty says to her before she hangs up the phone is, just do it now, get it over with. And Eileen says, okay. And then they hang up the phone. And I just feel bad because, she just hasn't had really anybody to trust, ever. And it makes me kind of sad. I mean, she killed people, so it doesn't make me, feel like she was a great person. But it's just a hard life. Eileen confessed to the murders on January 16th of 1991. But when she admitted to them, she insisted that they were all in self-defense. She said, these men were trying to rape me. Anybody in my position would have done the same thing. And there was really not a whole lot of reason to disbelieve her. At least at the time. So on January 14th of 1992, she went to trial for Richard Mallory's murder, that first murder that she committed. Because that obviously had the most evidence, right? They have the pawn shop ticket with her fingerprint on it, and they found the body. So that is going to be the one that they are going to try her on. She was convicted of that on January 27th of 1992, and it only took the jurors 91 minutes of deliberation to decide that she was guilty, which is not good. Like, if you're, tip of the day, if you're on trial, you want it to take a long time, because that means that the jurors are not 100% sure about what they believe, and they're discussing it. If it takes a short amount of time, you can be pretty sure that they found you guilty. But Eileen didn't know that. So when the verdict came back that Eileen was guilty, she was furious. And she started berating the judge, berating the jurors as they were leaving. You know, she said some pretty bad things to them, which is bad for her because, yes, she's been convicted, but they haven't sentenced her yet. So, oops. Oh, I forgot. How could I have forgotten this? Ty testified against her. So they got Ty on the stand, and she testified against Eileen. Watching Eileen's face when Ty was testifying against her, it was like, you could see that her heart was like breaking, right? Like the person that she loved was basically saying that she was guilty. She was at the sentencing trial. She was diagnosed by psychiatrists to have a borderline personality disorder as well as antisocial personality disorder, but the jury at this point didn't care. She was sentenced to death for the murder of Richard Mallory. On March 31st of 1992, she pled no contest to the murders of Humphries, Burris, and Spears. No contest means like, yep, I did it, right? And she said her reason was she wanted to get right with God. And for those three, she was given 3 more death sentences, so she's up to 4 death sentences now. In June of 92, she pled guilty to the murder of Karskadon and received her 5th death sentence. In February of 93, she pled guilty to the murder of Antonio for her 6th and final death sentence. And if you'll remember, I said the only one that she wasn't given a death sentence for was Sims, Peter Sims, because they never found his body. So she has 6 death sentences, which is not good. She's on death row. The psychologists are studying her, as they do a lot of people who have been convicted of things like this, and they give her a psychopathy checklist. And to be diagnosed of psychopathy, you in most states have to score above a 25. She scored a 32. So pretty high, 32 out of 40, and was diagnosed with psychopathy, in addition to those personality disorders. She lived her life on death row, but she started acting more erratic as time went on. So pause. I cut out my hearts, and I'm going to glue them onto my pieces of paper. I'm gonna do every other. So like pink, gold, pink, gold. By 2001, she made it very clear that she was not happy. She did not want to live on death row, and she began to look forward to death. She said, in order to try to speed up the process, she said, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." So her hope was that they would expedite this process, because she's saying, there's just no hope for me. I can't be reformed. I'm miserable. But she is miserable for reasons, or at least reasons that she perceived. She said that prison matrons had started putting things into her food, dirt, saliva, urine. They'd started tainting her food with these things. And her argument was, listen, yeah, I know I did something wrong. A lot of something's wrong, but I, deserve to be treated like a human until I'm put to death. And there's a woman who at 34 years, Eileen's 34 at this time, there's a woman who adopts her to try to be like, listen, this is a human. We need to care about this human. This lady adopts her, and she showed up to the trials, and she stood in the back of the room, and I just can't imagine, but, props to her. Anyways, Eileen is convinced that these people are doing this to her food to try to get her to push her to the edge, to get her to commit suicide before she is going to be executed. And she complains of other things. She complained of strip searches, tight handcuffs, door kicking, frequent window checks, low water pressure, mildew on her mattress, and cat calling. So she was basically saying, these people are treating me like crap. I don't want to live anymore. Unfortunately, that's not exactly how death row works. But she was getting closer to her execution date. And in the weeks before her execution, she granted several interviews with Nick Broomfield, who she'd already spoken to before, but she kind of wanted to get her story across better. So he interviews her, and if you've seen Eileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer, Life and Death of a Monster, it's Life and Death of a something. It's of the interviews that she did with Nick Broomfield. She really started to express her anticipation of being executed. She wanted to not be here anymore. She talked about the torture that she claimed to have experienced at the hands of the prison system. And at one point, she even turned on Nick. She said, "You sabotaged my ass, society and the cops and the system. A raped woman got executed and was used for books and movies and shit." So at this point, and, Nick, whether or not Nick is to blame for any of that, probably not, but she is mad, right? She feels like she has been wronged. She knows that she has done bad things. I'm not really sure if I would say that she showed remorse for the bad things that she did, but she showed awareness that they were bad. But she was done, and she was done with Nick at this point. Her final sentence on camera was, "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass." So she really did seem to blame society. She thought that society was trying to make her life miserable for some reason. And she was also a little bit delusional, I think, at the end, because she talked a lot about there being bugs in her cell, and people were emitting a high-pitched sound to drive her crazy. Not that was ever proven, but that's what she said. And there's a lot of places you can listen to her talking about that. It's really hard to follow because she jumps from one instance to the next of these things that are happening in the prison to drive her crazy. But her execution took place at 9:47 a.m. on October 9th of 2002. She declined the traditional last meal. And just as a heads up, you don't have to have their last meal. You can request anything that's under $20. She declined that. She said, "I just want a cup of black coffee." So she said, heck the system, for the millionth time. Really, her life was a bunch of heck the systems. She said, "Give me coffee instead." She gave some last words that are still confusing to everyone, and I'm going to read them to you. Her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back." Which kind of makes it sound like she goes back and forth from, like, God and Jesus, like, aliens and, like, motherships and stuff, so, like, I don't know. She had a really rough life. People aren't sure whether she said that to appear to be insane, like they were unfairly killing an insane person, or if she genuinely was functioning outside of the realm of reality. In the end, she was only the 10th woman to have been executed in the United States and the second Floridian woman to be killed. Her ashes were spread beneath a tree in Michigan, where she was born, by her best friend, Dawn Botkins, to whom she wrote faithfully while she was on death row. She wrote letters all the time. And Dawn was able to come visit her before she was executed. And Dawn said that there was nothing sad about it. She was ready to go. She was done. And there was nothing really sad about it. But it was definitely a relief to the victims' families to know that she was no longer going to be able to harm anyone. Yeah, so we have our first craft and crime execution. I'm not looking forward, but I really am intrigued by last meals. And I was kind of like, oh, cool, we'll talk about a last meal, but she just picked coffee. So, but yeah, so it's really sad. If you've ever watched anything about her, like, yes, 100% what she did was terrible. Like, there's no doubt, like, there's no way that you can say that it wasn't. But it's just really sad. You can tell that she was just really lonely. She didn't have anyone really who loved her. She thought she had Ty. Ty kind of turned on her. She lost her grandma when she was little. She lost Keith, her brother. She lost Keith, her child. It was a hard life. But they have done a lot of investigating, and she does appear to be, like, spot on for being a psychopath. So I guess justice was served. I don't know how all y'all feel about the death penalty. I'm not a huge fan. I just don't get the eye for an eye thing, but that's besides the point. Justice was served, other than for poor Peter Sims, because nobody was ever convicted of his murder, and they never found his body. But yeah, I'm going to string these together, and I will be right back to show you the final result. Okay, listen. This was like the easiest thing I've ever done, and also it's really cute, so I'm pumped. So cute! And yes, I'm aware I could have done this with my Cricut, but I wanted it to be a little, like, not perfect. And everybody knows that I'm good at not perfect, so I will take that to school and put it on my desk because it's super cute! I made something that looked good! Okay. Next month, I will be talking to you about John Wayne Gacy, or Pogo the Clown. But until then, everybody stay safe and have a nice February. Bye.